The year was 1887, deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. They called it the Winter of Blue Snow, because the cold was so fierce it turned a man's skin the color of a bruised plum before it killed him. But for Oliver Thorne, the cold wasn't the most dangerous thing in the valley. It was the woman he found half buried in a snowdrift, a woman standing 6'3", with hands the size of shovels, and a secret that would bring the most ruthless killers in the territory to Oliver's door. You might think you know how a Western romance starts, but you've never heard the story of the giant widow and the line she whispered in the dark that changed everything. I need to make love. Don't move. It wasn't a seduction. It was a matter of life and death. Oliver Thorne was not a man who enjoyed company. In the Montana Territory, company usually meant one of two things. Someone wanted to borrow money they wouldn't pay back, or someone wanted to put a bullet in you for the land you stood on. Oliver owned 3,000 acres of scrub grass and timber, butting up against the jagged teeth of the Bitterroot Range. It was hard land, the kind of land that broke softer men. Alvar, however, was made of grit and gristle. At 42, he walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a Comanche arrow in 74, and his face was a map of weathered lines hidden beneath a beard the color of iron filings. It was late November when the blizzard hit. It wasn't a normal storm. It was a white wall of fury that descended from the north, swallowing the world whole. Alva had spent the morning securing the barn, ensuring his 2 prize mares, Bess and Jitters, had enough hay to outlast the siege. By noon, the wind was howling like a banshee. Alva was heading back to his cabin, his head bent against the gale, when he saw it. It wasn't a shape that belonged in the wild. It was geometric, a square edge jutting out of a snowbank near the creek bed, about a mile from his porch. Alva didn't run. He didn't panic. He adjusted the Winchester 1873 rifle slung over his shoulder, pulled his buffalo coat tighter, and trudged through the knee-deep drifts. As he got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was an overturned wagon. The wood was splintered, one wheel spinning lazily in the wind, creaking with a rhythmic thump-creak, thump-creak. The horses were gone, likely cut loose or spooked off. Alva circled the wreck, his thumb resting on the hammer of his rifle. Ambushes were common in these parts, specifically from the chaotic remnants of the road agents who used to plague Banick. But the snow around the wagon was undisturbed, save for the drift piling up against the side. This had happened hours ago, maybe last night. He peered inside the canvas covering. It was empty of cargo. No flour, no tools, no gold, just straw and blood. He followed the trail of red droplets. They were freezing as they hit the snow, creating a macabre breadcrumb trail leading toward a cluster of boulders near the tree line. Alva found her there. He stopped, genuinely taken aback. He had seen many things in the West. Dead outlaws, stampeding bison, towns burned to ash. But he had never seen a woman like this. She was slumped against the granite rock, half covered in snow. Even seated, she was massive. Her shoulders were broad, stretching the fabric of a heavy wool coat that looked like it had been tailored for a man. Her legs, sprawled out before her, were long and thick with muscle. Alva approached cautiously. "Mom." No movement. He knelt beside her. Her face was pale, almost translucent, framed by chaotic braids of blonde hair that looked like spun gold mixed with mud. She had a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once, and scarring above her left eyebrow. He reached out to check for a pulse at her neck. Her skin was ice cold, but there was a faint, thrumming beat. As soon as his fingers touched her skin, her eyes snapped open. They were blue, pale, icy, terrified blue. Before Alva could blink, A hand the size of a catcher's mitt shot out and grabbed him by the lapels of his buffalo coat. The strength behind the grip was shocking. She yanked him down, nearly knocking his forehead against hers. Did you bring the priest?" she rasped. Her voice was deep, a guttural alto that sounded like gravel grinding together. "No priest, ma'am," Alva said, trying to pry her fingers loose without hurting her. "Just a rancher. You're freezing. We need to move." "He's dead," she whispered, her eyes losing focus. "My Jacob. They shot him. In the back." "I'm sorry to hear that," Alva said, his eyes scanning the tree line for whoever they were. "But if we stay here, you'll be joining him." She tried to stand, and Alva moved to help her. When she rose to her full height, she towered over him. Alva was 6 foot even, but this woman had at least 3 inches on him. She swayed, her massive frame shuddering. "My leg," she groaned. Alva looked down. Her skirt was torn, revealing a nasty gash on her outer thigh. It had stopped bleeding due to the cold, but it was deep. "I can't walk," she said, her voice trembling not from weakness, but from fury at her own body. "I ain't asking you to dance," Alva grunted. He turned his back to her. "Put your arms around my neck. I'm going to carry you." She hesitated. I am heavy, Mr. Thorne, and I've carried calves heavier than you. Get on." It was a lie. She was solid muscle and bone, easily 220 pounds of dead weight in her exhausted state. When she slumped onto his back, Alvar's knees buckled slightly, but he gritted his teeth and forced his legs to straighten. The mile back to the cabin was a blur of agony. The wind screamed, trying to push them over. The woman, Alvar didn't even know her name, drifted in and out of consciousness, her breath hot against his frozen ear, mumbling names he didn't know. Cyrus. The deed. The box. By the time Alvar kicked open the door to his cabin, his lungs were burning like he'd swallowed hot coals. He stumbled to the hearth, dropping to his knees, and eased her onto the bearskin rug in front of the dying embers. He collapsed beside her, gasping for air. He looked at the woman. She was out cold, her massive frame filling the space between the hearth and his armchair. Alva Thorne had spent 10 years trying to keep the world out of his cabin. He had just carried it right through the front door. The storm raged for 2 days. Inside the cabin, time was measured only by the feeding of the fire and the changing of bandages. Alvar was no doctor, but he was practical. He had cleaned the wound on her leg with whiskey and stitched it with catgut. She hadn't woken up during the stitching, which worried him. He learned a few things about her while she slept. Her clothes were high quality, but worn. In her pockets, he found no money, but he found a locket. Inside was a tin-type picture of a small, wiry man with a kind smile. Jacob, he assumed, and she was armed. Not with a derringer or a lady's pistol, but with a Colt Frontier 6-shooter, the grips worn smooth from use. She wore it in a shoulder holster concealed beneath her coat. On the morning of the 3rd day, the wind died down. The silence that followed was deafening. Alva was at the stove, frying salt pork and coffee, when he heard the creak of floorboards. He turned slowly, the iron skillet in his hand. She was sitting up. The bare skin had fallen away from her shoulders. She was wearing one of his flannel shirts he had put on her to replace her wet blouse. It was tight across her broad shoulders. She stared at him, her eyes clear now. There was no fear in them, only calculation. "You're Alvar Thorne," she stated. It wasn't a question. Alvar raised an eyebrow. "I am. And you're sitting on my rug, wearing my shirt, eating my food." "I'm Joyce Vance," she said. She tried to shift her leg and winced, sucking in a sharp breath through her teeth. "But folks usually call me Big Ellie, or worse." Joyce fits better, Alva said, pouring a cup of black coffee. He walked over and handed it to her. Her hand, large and calloused, brushed his. How do you know my name? Joyce took the coffee, blowing on the steam. I saw the brand on the barn door when you carried me in. Circle T. Jacob told me about this place. Said Alva Thorne was the only man in the valley who didn't sell his soul to Cyrus Blackwood. The name landed in the room like a grenade. Cyrus Blackwood, the cattle king of Banick, the man who owned the sheriff, the judge, and half the territory. Alva had spent a decade avoiding Blackwood's offers to buy his ranch, offers that had turned from polite to threatening in recent months. You know Blackwood? Alva asked, his voice dropping an octave. Joyce took a long sip of coffee. I know him. My husband, Jacob. He was Blackwood's accountant for 6 years. Alva whistled low. That's a dangerous job. Men who count Blackwood's money tend to end up with short lives. Jacob was honest, Joyce said, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat, forcing the steel back into her tone. Too honest. He found discrepancies. Blackwood wasn't just running cattle. He was laundering money for the railroad expansion, stealing land deeds from widows and forging signatures. Jacob stole the ledger, the real one. Alva set his cup down. The wagon, the lockbox. Joyce's eyes widened. You found it? I found an empty wagon, Joyce. There was no box. The colour drained from her face. She looked like a statue of grief carved from granite. Then it's gone. It fell out, or they took it. If they have the ledger. Who is they? Blackwood's hounds, a man named Skinner, and his posse. They ambushed us near the pass. Jacob. He told me to run. He stayed behind with the rifle. She looked down at her massive hands. I could have fought them. I've broken men's jaws before, but Jacob, he made me promise to protect the evidence, and I failed. Alva looked at the woman. She was a paradox. Physically, she could probably snap him in half, but sitting there, wrapped in blankets, she looked small. You didn't fail, Alva said gruffly. You survived. In this country, that's the only victory that counts. He walked to the window and peered through the slats. The snow was blindingly white under the morning sun. But something caught his eye, a glint of metal on the ridgeline, about half a mile out. Alva squinted. He saw movement. Riders, 4 of them, moving slow, tracking. Joyce, Alva said calmly. What? How good are you with that Colt? I don't miss. Good, Alva said, grabbing his Winchester from the rack above the door, because we've got company, and they ain't selling Bibles. Joyce struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her leg. She grabbed the table for support, her head nearly brushing the timber beams of the ceiling. She looked at Alva, and for the first time, a spark of trust passed between them. If that's Skinner, she said, her voice dropping to a growl, leave the one with the red scarf to me. Deal, Alva said. But first, we need to make sure they don't burn us out. Alva began barricading the windows. Joyce limped to the back of the cabin. Alva, she called out. He turned. She was holding a heavy cast-iron poker from the fireplace, testing its weight. Why are you helping me? She asked. You could have left me in the snow. You could hand me over to them right now, and Blackwood would probably pay you a fortune. Alva looked at her. He thought about his empty life, the silence of the ranch, the years of solitude. He thought about the bullies he had hated all his life, and the way this giant woman looked at him, not with pity for his limp, but with an equal's gaze. I never did like bullies, Alva muttered, and I sure as hell don't like trespassers. He racked the lever of his Winchester. Get down. They're coming. But as the riders approached, Alva realized something. They weren't attacking, not yet. They were slowing down, holding up a white flag. "It's a parley," Alvar whispered. "It's a trap," Joyce hissed. "Stay out of sight," Alvar ordered. "You're too big to hide easily, so get in the bedroom. Keep the door cracked. If I give the signal, you start shooting." "What's the signal?" "I'll drop my hat." Alvar opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting his face. The lead rider trotted up. It was indeed Skinner, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that looked like dead fish. He wore a red scarf. "Morning, Thorn," Skinner yelled, his voice sickly sweet. "Skinner?" Alvar nodded. "You're on private property." "Just passing through, neighbor. Looking for a lost sheep. A big one. Stray woman. German stock. Heavy set. Maybe you've seen her." "Haven't seen a soul in 3 days," Alvar lied, his face a stone mask. Skinner leaned forward on his saddle horn. "Is that so? 'Cause we found a wagon wreckage not far from here, and tracks leading this way. One set deep, like a man carrying a heavy load." Skinner's eyes drifted to the cabin door. "Mind if we come in and warm up? Check the cellar?" "I do mind," Alvar said. "I got the pox, highly contagious." Skinner chuckled, but his hand drifted toward his pistol. "You know, Alvar, Mr. Blackwood has always admired your stubbornness, but harboring a fugitive, that's hanging business." "She ain't a fugitive if she hasn't been charged," Alvar said, slipping up. Skinner's smile vanished. "So she is here." The tension snapped like a dry twig. Skinner drew. Alvar was faster. He didn't drop his hat. He fired from the hip. The bullet took Skinner's hat off, missing his skull by an inch. Skinner's horse reared. The other 3 men scrambled to control their mounts. "Next one goes between your eyes," Alvar roared. "Get off my land!" Skinner brought his horse under control, his face purple with rage. He looked at the cabin, then back at Alvar. He knew Alvar had the high ground and cover. "This ain't over, Thorn," Skinner spat. "We'll be back, and we'll bring the cannon." They wheeled their horses and galloped off into the snow blind. Alvar stood on the porch until they were gone. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline. He turned to go back inside. Joyce was standing in the doorway, the Colt in her hand. "You missed," she said. "I was aiming for the hat," Alvar lied. "Didn't want to start a war just yet." "War's already started, Alvar," she said somberly, "and we're on the losing side." Night fell over the Bitterroot Valley like a shroud of heavy velvet. The wind had picked up again, whistling through the chinks in the logs of Alvar's cabin, but the interior was warm, lit by the low glow of the kerosene lamp and the dying embers of the hearth. Alvar sat in the rocking chair, his Winchester across his lap, cleaning the barrel with a rag dipped in oil. Joyce sat on the edge of the bed, her massive frame casting a long shadow against the wall. She had found a spare pair of Alvar's trousers, canvas work pants, and had cut the legs to fit. She looked less like a victim now, and more like a soldier waiting for the bugle. "You think they'll come tonight?" she asked, her voice low. The painkillers Alvar had given her, a mixture of willow bark and whiskey, had dulled the edge of her agony, but her face was still pale. "Skinner is a nocturnal animal," Alvar muttered, snapping the lever of the rifle shut. "He likes the dark. It hides his lack of courage." Alvar stood up and moved to the window, peering through the small gap in the barricade. The snow was illuminated by the moon, creating a landscape of blue and silver. It was beautiful, but Alvar knew that beauty concealed death. "He won't come alone," Alvar continued. "Skinner is the type who brings a pack. He'll try to flush us out." "Fire," Joyce said, realizing the implication. "Fire," Alvar agreed. He turned to her. "Can you ride?" Joyce looked at her bandaged leg. "I can ride. Getting on the horse is the problem. We need to leave, Now, before they circle the house." Alvar began to move with practiced efficiency. He packed a saddlebag with jerky, ammunition, and medical supplies. He grabbed his heavy buffalo coat and tossed Joyce a thick wool poncho. "My horses are in the barn," Alvar said. "Bess is steady. She'll take your weight without complaint. Jitters, well, his name fits." They were halfway to the back door when the first glass shattered. A Molotov cocktail, a crude bottle of kerosene with a burning rag, smashed through the upper window of the loft. The liquid fire sprayed across the dry timber of the roof beams. "Go!" Alvar roared. He kicked the back door open. The cold air rushed in, feeding the flames above them. The crackle of fire was instantaneous, a roaring hunger that ate at the dry wood of the cabin. Alvar grabbed Joyce's arm, pulling her into the snow. They stumbled toward the barn, the orange glow of the burning cabin illuminating the yard. Crack! A bullet whizzed past Alvar's ear, embedding itself in the barn door. "They're in the trees!" Alvar shouted. He shoved Joyce behind a water trough. "Stay down!" Alvar raised his Winchester and fired 3 rapid shots toward the flash of the muzzle in the tree line. He heard a yelp of pain. "Cover me!" Joyce yelled. To Alvar's shock, she didn't stay down. She rose, using the trough as a rest, and leveled her Colt Peacemaker. Bang! Bang! Her aim was true. A shadow fell from a pine tree 50 yards out. "I told you I don't miss," she grunted, limping toward the barn. Inside the barn, the horses were panicking. The smell of smoke had reached them. Alvar moved to Bess, calming the mare with a soothing whisper before saddling her in record time. He helped Joyce up, heaving her massive weight into the saddle. She groaned, her teeth clenched so hard Alvar thought they might crack, but she settled in, wrapping the reins around her gloved hands. Alvar mounted Jitters. He drew his rifle. "We go out the back," Alvar commanded. "Through the paddock fence. We head for the ridge. If we make the high ground, we can lose them in the caves. And if we don't, then we die in the snow." Alvar kicked the paddock gate open. They spurred the horses into the night. Behind them, Alvar's home. 10 years of labor, his sanctuary, was a towering inferno, painting the snow blood red. They rode hard. The wind bit at their faces, freezing tears on their cheeks. Behind them, the sound of hooves thundered. Skinner's posse was in pursuit. They reached the base of Dead Man's Ridge, a treacherous incline of shale and ice. The horses struggled, their hooves slipping. "They're gaining!" Joyce shouted, looking back. 4 riders were closing the distance, their torches bobbing like angry fireflies. "Up there!" Alvar pointed to a narrow fissure in the rock face. "The old silver mine. We can hold them off there." They abandoned the horses at the entrance, slapping their rumps to send them running down the canyon to draw the fire. Alvar and Joyce scrambled into the darkness of the mine shaft just as bullets began to chip away the rock around the entrance. They were trapped, buried in the earth. But for the moment, they were alive. The mine was a labyrinth of rotting support beams and stagnant air. It smelled of wet earth and copper. They moved deep into the shaft, away from the entrance, until the light from the outside was just a pinprick. Alvar lit a small lantern he had packed. The yellow light revealed Joyce's face. She was sweating despite the freezing cold, her skin grey. "We need to rest," Alvar said. "Your leg?" "My leg is fine," she lied, sliding down the wall to sit on the damp floor. "It's the rest of me that's broken." Alvar sat opposite her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a crushing fatigue. He looked at this woman, this giantess who had crashed into his life and burned it to the ground. He should hate her. He should be furious. But as he looked at her, he felt a strange kinship. They were both outcasts. Him, the cripple with the land nobody wanted. Her, the woman too big for a world designed for delicate things. "Tell me about the ledger," Alvar said softly. "The real story, Joyce. Why would Blackwood chase you into a blizzard for a book of numbers?" Joyce closed her eyes. "Jacob, he wasn't just an accountant, Alvar. He was Blackwood's brother-in-law." Alvar stiffened. "You didn't mention that." "I didn't think it mattered. But it does. Blackwood trusts family. Or he did. Jacob found out that Blackwood was planning to cut the family out. He was selling the water rights to the valley to the mining conglomerate in Helena. It would dry up every ranch from here to Banick, including yours." "My water rights?" Alvar asked, his voice hardening. "I have the deed to the creek." "Not anymore," Joyce whispered. "That's what was in the lockbox. Not just a ledger, forged deeds. Jacob stole them back. He was trying to save the valley. He was trying to save you." Alvar sat back, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. He had thought he was just a bystander helping a damsel. In reality, he was fighting for his own existence. "Where is the box, Joyce?" Alvar asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You said it fell out of the wagon." Joyce hesitated. Her eyes darted to the side. "Joyce." She sighed, a sound of utter defeat. She reached into the deep bosom of her dress, pulling out a heavy iron key on a chain. "The box didn't fall out," she admitted. "I hid it. Under the floorboards of your cabin, beneath the rug." Alvar stared at her. The cabin that was currently a pile of ash. "You left it in the fire?" Alvar asked, incredulous. "It's a fireproof box, Alvar. Jacob paid $50 for it. It can withstand an inferno. I couldn't carry it. I couldn't risk them finding it on me if they caught us." "You used my home as a safe deposit box, and then let it burn," Alvar said, standing up. He paced the narrow tunnel. "You lied to me." "I didn't know if I could trust you," she snapped, her voice echoing in the tunnel. "I didn't know if you were one of them." Alvar stopped pacing. He looked down at her. "I carried you through the snow. I stitched your leg. I shot a man for you." "And I thank you for it," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But everyone betrays me, Alvar. Everyone. Even Jacob." "What do you mean?" "Jacob. He didn't take the deeds to save the valley," she sobbed. "He took them to blackmail Blackwood. He wanted a payout. He was going to take the money and leave. Without me." The silence in the mine was heavy. "How do you know?" Alvar asked gently. "I read his letter. It was in the box. He wrote to his mistress in St. Louis. He called me his beast of burden. Said I was useful for carrying things, but not for loving." She buried her face in her hands, her massive shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Alvar felt his anger evaporate. He knelt beside her. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a man who offered comfort. But he reached out, placing his hand on her shoulder. "He was a fool," Alvar said. "A blind fool." Joyce looked up, her eyes red. "Look at me, Alvar. I am a monster, a giant." "I'm looking at you," Alvar said, his voice steady. "And I don't see a monster. I see the only woman who's ever had the guts to look me in the eye." He leaned in. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. He kissed her forehead. "We're going back," Alvar said. "We're going to wait for the fire to die down. We're going to dig that box out of the ashes, and then we're going to take it to the federal marshal in Banick, not for Jacob, not for the valley, but to nail Cyrus Blackwood to the wall." Joyce nodded, wiping her face. "Okay." But the betrayal wasn't over. As they prepared to move deeper into the mine to wait out the night, a voice echoed from the entrance of the tunnel. Touching. Truly touching. Alvar spun around, raising his rifle. Standing at the edge of the lantern light was not Skinner. It was a man in a long duster coat, holding a torch in one hand and a Schofield revolver in the other. It was Doc Miller, the town doctor, the man Alva had trusted to set his broken leg 3 years ago, the man Alva had planned to go to for help. "Doc?" Alva lowered the rifle slightly, confused. "Put it down, Alva," Doc Miller said, his voice regretful. "Skinner is outside with 5 rifles aimed at this hole. There's no way out." "You're working with them?" Alvar asked, betrayal stinging worse than the cold. "Cyrus pays better than sick farmers." Doc shrugged. "He knew you'd head for the caves. He sent me to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Joyce growled, standing up despite her pain. "The key," Doc said, pointing to the chain around Joyce's neck. "Give us the key to the box you left in the cabin, and we let Alva walk. You... Well, Mrs. Vance, you have to come with us. Cyrus has questions." Joyce looked at Alva. She looked at the key. "No deal," Alva said. "Alva," Joyce said. "He'll kill you." "He'll kill me anyway," Alva said. "Doc doesn't leave loose ends." Alva looked at Joyce. He saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't going to surrender. "Drop the lantern," Alva whispered. "What?" "Drop it." Joyce didn't hesitate. She smashed the lantern on the ground. The mine plunged into pitch blackness. Bang! Bang! Doc fired blindly into the dark. The bullets ricocheted off the stone walls with terrified whines. "Run!" Alva shouted, grabbing Joyce's hand in the dark. They knew the darkness better than the town doctor. They scrambled deeper into the earth, down a shaft that Alva knew led to a lower ventilation opening on the other side of the mountain. Behind them, they heard Doc cursing, and then the shouts of Skinner's men entering the cave. The hunt was on again. 2 days later. Banick, Montana. The town was bustling with the midday trade, unaware of the drama unfolding in the shadows. Alva and Joyce were unrecognizable. They had stolen clothes from a laundry line outside a miner's shack. Alva wore a battered derby hat and a ragged coat. Joyce wore a man's oversized canvas duster and a slouch hat pulled low to hide her face. They looked like 2 destitute prospectors down on their luck. They had the box. They had circled back to the burnt remains of the cabin under the cover of a snowstorm, dug the lockbox out of the cooling ashes, and trekked 20 miles over the pass to Banick. The box was heavy, wrapped in a burlap sack carried by Alva. "The marshal's office is across the street," Alva whispered. They were huddled in an alleyway between the saloon and the general store. "We can't just walk in," Joyce said, scanning the street. "Blackwood owns the deputies. If we hand this over to the wrong person, we're dead. We need the U.S. Marshal. Marshal Dillon. He's federal. He rides the circuit. He's due in town today. And if he's not here yet, then we wait." They needed a place to hide. The street was filling with Blackwood's men. Skinner was there, leaning against a post, watching the crowd. He knew they would come here. It was the only play left. "The Hotel Mead," Alva said, pointing to the brick building on the corner. "Room 4 facing the street. We can watch for the marshal's arrival from the window." They slipped into the hotel through the kitchen entrance, startling a cook whom Alvar silenced with a gold coin, the last of his savings. They made it to the 2nd floor, down the narrow hallway, and into room 4. It was a small room, a brass bed, a wash basin, a wardrobe. Alva locked the door and slid a heavy dresser in front of it. He moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains. "See anything?" Joyce asked, sitting heavily on the bed. She was exhausted. The infection in her leg was spreading. He could see the fever in her eyes. "Not yet," Alva said. Suddenly, heavy boots sounded in the hallway. Thump! 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 Alva froze. He signaled Joyce to be silent. The footsteps stopped right outside their door. "Open up!" It was Skinner's voice. "Hotel inspection," Alva looked at Joyce. They were trapped. The dresser wouldn't hold for long. If they had a shootout here, they would be gunned down before the marshal ever saw the deeds. They needed a diversion, a reason for the door to remain locked that a man like Skinner would respect, or at least hesitate to interrupt. Skinner rattled the handle. "I know someone's in there. I heard voices. Open up or we kick it down." Joyce looked at the bed. Then she looked at the lockbox. Then she looked at Alva. She stood up, her eyes wide with a desperate idea. She grabbed Alva by the collar and yanked him away from the window, throwing him onto the bed. The springs creaked loudly. "What are you?" Alva started. She pressed a finger to his lips. Her other hand went to her holster, unbuckling the leather strap on her Colt. Skinner pounded on the door again. "Last warning." Joyce leaned close to the door, her face inches from the wood. She deepened her voice, channeling a mixture of annoyance and sultry desperation. Then she said the line that would buy them the 30 seconds they needed to save their lives. "I need to make love. Don't move." She shouted it loud enough for Skinner to hear. But the second part, "Don't move," was whispered with terrifying intensity directly at Alva as she drew her gun. From the hallway, there was a pause. The crude laughter of men filtered through. "Sounds like someone's busy, boss," one of the deputies chuckled. "Sounds like a dying cow," Skinner grunted. "Open it anyway." The ruse had bought them seconds, but it wasn't enough. Skinner wasn't stopping. But the twist wasn't the line. The twist was what happened next. As Joyce aimed her Colt at the door, preparing to fire, Alva grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he hissed. "Look at the box." Joyce looked down. The burlap sack had fallen open on the bed. The lock box, damaged by the fire, had cracked along the hinge. "So," she whispered. "It's empty," Alva said. Joyce froze. She ripped the lid open. Empty. No deeds, no letters, no blackmail. "Jacob," she breathed. "He never put them in the box." "He played us," Alva realized. "He played everyone. He didn't hide the deeds in the box. He hid them." Alva looked at Joyce. He looked at the heavy, tacky locket hanging around her neck. The one with Jacob's picture. The one she had refused to take off even when she was freezing. "The locket," Alva said. "It's just a picture," Joyce said, confused. "Give it to me." Outside, the first kick hit the door. The wood splintered. Alva snatched the locket from her neck. He pried it open with his thumbnail. He pulled out the tin-type photo of Jacob. Behind the photo was a tightly folded piece of onion skin paper. He unfolded it. It wasn't the deeds. It was a receipt, a bank deposit receipt for the First National Bank of Banick. Safe Deposit Box 101. "The deeds are in the bank," Alva said, a wild grin spreading across his face. "Across the street." Crash. The door flew open. The dresser toppled. Skinner stood in the doorway, a shotgun in his hands. "Party's over," Skinner sneered. He looked at the two of them on the bed. "Where is it?" Joyce didn't hesitate. She didn't fire her gun. She threw the heavy, empty iron lockbox with all her giant strength. It sailed across the room like a cannonball, catching Skinner square in the chest. He wheezed, ribs cracking, and collapsed backward into the hallway, knocking over the two men behind him. "Window!" Alva yelled. He grabbed the bank receipt and grabbed Joyce. They didn't go out the door. They went through the second-story window, crashing through the glass and landing on the awning of the porch below, then rolling onto the snowy street of Banick. They landed in a heap of limbs and glass. Alva groaned, checking for broken bones. He looked up. Standing right in front of them, having just stepped off his horse, was a tall man with a silver star on his chest. U.S. Marshal Dillon. He looked down at the giant woman, and the bearded rancher sprawled at his feet. "Well," the marshal drawled, "you folks certainly know how to make an entrance." Alva held up the crumpled piece of onion skin paper. "Marshal," Alva gasped, "you're going to want to see this, and you're going to want to arrest the man in room 4. The street of Banick froze. It was a tableau of violence and law. Marshal Dillon stood tall, his hand resting on the ivory grip of his revolver, looking from the battered couple in the snow to the broken window of the Hotel Mead. "Get them inside the bank," Dillon barked to his deputy, a young man named Earp, a cousin of the famous brothers, or so he claimed, "and send for the doctor, the other doctor, not Miller." Alvar and Joyce were ushered into the First National Bank. It was a fortress of mahogany and brass, smelling of ink and money. The bank manager, a nervous little man named Mr. Henderson, looked at the blood on Joyce's duster and nearly fainted. "Open the vault," Dillon ordered, slapping the crumpled onion skin receipt onto the counter. "Box 101. I can't do that without Mr. Blackwood's permission," Henderson stammered. "He is the primary trustee of—" "You'll do it because I'm a United States Marshal," Dillon said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. "And because if you don't, I'll arrest you for conspiracy to commit murder." Henderson scrambled for his keys. Alvar sat Joyce down on a bench near the teller cage. Her leg was bleeding again, the stitches torn from the fall. She looked pale, her adrenaline fading into shock. "Stay with me, Ellie," Alva whispered, squeezing her hand. It was the first time he had called her Ellie. She managed a weak smile. "I ain't going nowhere, Alva. I want to see what my husband died for." Henderson returned with a long metal box. He placed it on the counter. Dillon gestured for Alvar to open it. Alvar stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. He lifted the lid. Inside there was no money. There were 3 leather-bound books and a stack of deeds. Dillon picked up the first book. He flipped through the pages. His stoic expression cracked. "Mother of God," Dillon muttered. "It's not just land fraud. It's a hit list." He turned the book around. Alva Thorne. Target, water rights obstruction. Method, accidental fire. Date scheduled, December 1st. Alva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He was planning to burn me out before I even met Joyce. "And here," Dillon pointed to another entry. "Jacob Vance. Target, liability. Method, road agent ambush. Note, ensure the wife is also liquidated. She is too large to hide and too stupid to lie." Joyce made a sound that was half sob, half growl. "He wrote that?" "Blackwood wrote it," Dillon confirmed. "But look at this." He pulled out a folded letter tucked into the back of the book. "This is in Jacob's handwriting." Alva took the letter. He read it aloud, his voice echoing in the silent bank. "Cyrus, I have done as you asked. The books are cooked, but I cannot do the rest. I cannot kill Joyce. I know she is an embarrassment to the social circle you aspire to, and I know you think her size makes her a freak, but she is loyal. I will take the fall for the embezzlement if you let us go west. If not, I take this book to the governor." Silence hung heavy in the room. "He didn't betray you," Alvar said, looking at Joyce with wide eyes. "He was trying to save you. He stole the books as leverage to keep Blackwood from having you killed." Joyce stared at the floor, the tears finally spilling over. Jacob hadn't been running away from her. He had been running for her. He was weak, yes, and a criminal, but in the end, he had loved her enough to die for her. "Well," a voice boomed from the street outside, "that is a touching story, truly." Alva spun around. Through the plate-glass window of the bank, he saw them. Cyrus Blackwood had arrived. He sat atop a black stallion, wearing a fur-lined coat that cost more than Alvar's ranch. Behind him stood Skinner, clutching his bruised chest, and Doc Miller, along with 10 other armed men. They formed a semicircle around the bank. "Marshal Dillon," Blackwood shouted, "you are harboring fugitives who murdered my accountant and stole my property. Send them out and we won't have any trouble." Dillon walked to the door, opening it just a crack. "I have the ledger, Cyrus. I have the murder orders in your own handwriting. Step down from that horse and surrender." Blackwood laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You have a book. I have 12 guns and the town judge in my pocket. Who do you think history will believe? The wealthy philanthropist or the cripple and the giantess?" Blackwood raised his hand. "Burn it down. Burn the bank." "He's crazy," Henderson squeaked. "My money is in here." Skinner stepped forward, lighting a torch. He grinned at Alvar through the window. "Get down." Alvar tackled Joyce just as the first shot rang out. Glass shattered everywhere. The bank turned into a shooting gallery. Dillon and Deputy Earp returned fire from the doorway, their Winchesters barking in a steady rhythm. "We can't stay here," Dillon shouted over the roar of gunfire. "They'll flank us." "The vault!" Alvar yelled. "It's thick steel. We can hold out inside." "No," Joyce said. She was struggling to her feet, her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. She looked at the blood on her hands. Jacob's blood, her blood, Alvar's blood. "If we go in the vault, we die in a box," she said. "I am done hiding in boxes." She looked at Alvar. "Can you shoot the hinges off the back door?" "I can," Alvar said. "Why?" "Because I'm going to create a distraction." "Joyce, don't be a fool. Trust me, Alvar, like I trusted you in the snow." Before he could stop her, Joyce grabbed a heavy brass spittoon from the floor. It must have weighed 20 pounds, and hurled it through the remaining shards of the front window. It struck one of the gunmen, knocking him clean off his feet. Then she stood up in full view of the window. She drew her frame up to its full 6'3" height. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a Valkyrie. "Blackwood!" she screamed. Her voice was so loud, so primal, that the shooting actually stopped for a second. "You called me a freak!" she roared, walking toward the door. "You called me a beast! Well, come and meet the beast!" She kicked the front door open. It was madness. It was suicide. But it was also the bravest thing Alvar had ever seen. Blackwood's men were so stunned by the sight of this giant woman charging them, unarmed save for her rage, that they hesitated. That hesitation was all Alvar needed. He didn't run out the back. He ran out the front, right behind her, his Winchester leveled. "Drop it!" Alvar fired. He didn't aim for the men. He aimed for the horses. He clipped Blackwood's stallion on the flank. The horse reared violently, throwing the cattle king into the mud. Chaos erupted. The deputies fired. Skinner charged Joyce, a knife in his hand. Joyce didn't flinch. She caught Skinner's wrist in midair. The size difference was laughable. She twisted his arm with a sickening crunch, spinning him around and using him as a human shield against the other gunman. "Shoot me and you kill your foreman," she yelled. Blackwood scrambled up from the mud, pulling a hidden derringer from his coat. He aimed it at Joyce's back. "Goodbye, widow," he hissed. Blam. The shot didn't come from Blackwood. It came from Alvar. Alvar had dropped to one knee in the snow, steadying his rifle. The bullet struck Blackwood's hand, destroying the gun and 3 fingers. Blackwood screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his mangled hand. "That," Alvar said, racking the lever, "was for the water rights." Marshal Dillon stepped out, smoke curling from his gun barrel. The rest of the posse, seeing their leader broken and their foreman captured by a woman they couldn't defeat, threw down their weapons. The siege of Banick was over. Alvar limped over to Joyce. She was breathing hard, holding the unconscious Skinner by the collar like a rag doll. She dropped him in the snow. She looked at Alvar. Her adrenaline crashed. She swayed. Alvar caught her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her up. "I got you," he whispered. "I got you, Big Ellie." She buried her face in his neck and wept. The Bitterroot Valley was transforming. The snow had melted, revealing the scars of the winter, but also the green promise of new grass. Circle T Ranch was busy. It wasn't just Alvar anymore. With the reward money from the capture of Cyrus Blackwood, who was now awaiting hanging in the territorial prison, Alvar had hired a crew. They had raised a new barn, bigger than the last one, and they were halfway done with the new house. It was a strange house for the territory. The doorways were 7 feet high. The ceilings were vaulted. The furniture, which Oliver was building himself, was oversized, sturdy, and beautiful. Alva stood on the porch of the unfinished house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of purple and gold. His leg still ached when it rained, but he didn't mind it as much anymore. He heard heavy footsteps behind him. Joyce stepped onto the porch. She was wearing a simple calico dress, but she had abandoned the corsets and bustles that society demanded. She walked with a natural grace now, her limp almost gone. She carried 2 tin cups of coffee. "Sugar?" she asked. "Black," Alva said, taking the cup. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horses graze in the lower pasture. Bess and Jitters had a foal now, a spirited colt that Joyce had named Lucky. "The marshal came by today," Joyce said softly, bringing the mail. "Oh?" "He says the deed transfer is complete. The water rights are secured in your name, perpetually." "Our name," Alva corrected. Joyce looked at him. The sunset caught the gold in her hair. She looked strong, healthy, and for the first time in her life, she looked at peace. But there was still a question in her eyes. "Alvar," she said. "The house, the doors, the furniture. What about them? You built them big. For me." "I built them for the person living here," Alvar shrugged. "I'm tired of ducking my head in small rooms anyway." Joyce set her cup down on the railing. She turned to face him. She towered over him. But Alvar didn't back up. He stepped closer. "You know what people say," Joyce whispered. "About us. The cripple and the giant. They laugh." "Let 'em laugh," Alvar said. "They're still buying our beef, and they're terrified of you." "I don't want them to be terrified," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to be seen." "I see you," Alvar said. He reached up, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "I saw you in the snow when you were half dead. I saw you in the mine when you were scared. And I saw you in the bank when you were a warrior. I've never seen anything more beautiful." Joyce's breath hitched. "Alva." "I'm a broken-down cowboy, Joyce. I got a bad leg and a worse temper. I ain't much of a prize. But this land and this heart, they're yours. If you'll have them." Joyce smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a society wife. It was a true smile, wide and radiant. She leaned down. Alva rose on his tiptoes. They kissed. It was slow, deep, and tasted of coffee and redemption. It was the kiss of 2 survivors who had found the only other person in the world who fit their jagged edges. When they pulled apart, Joyce rested her forehead against his. "Alva," she whispered, a playful glint in her eye. "Yeah?" She leaned close to his ear, her voice dropping to that husky whisper that had once saved their lives. "I need to make love." She paused, smiling. "And you can move all you want." Alvar laughed, a sound that echoed across the valley, chasing away the ghosts of the winter. He took her hand, that large, strong, capable hand, and led her inside the house that was built just for them. The winter of blue snow was over. The spring of the giant's heart had begun. And that, my friends, is the legend of Oliver Thorne and Joyce Vance. In a time when the West was wild and unforgiving, They found something stronger than the cold and more dangerous than a loaded gun. They found each other. History books might not mention the giant widow or the limping rancher, but in the Bitterroot Valley, if you listen closely to the wind in the pines, you can still hear the story of the couple who stood back to back against the world and won. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West. It was a long ride, but some stories deserve the time. Now I have a challenge for you. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, I want to know who the real loyal listeners are. Go down to the comments and type giant heart. Let's see how many of us survived the blizzard together. If you loved this story and want more gritty, real-life inspired tales from the frontier, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a campfire story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.